March 11th, 2011. Just another day for the residents of Japan. Until 2:46 p.m. when tragedy struck. A magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck the region. The earthquake was caused by the rupture of a stretch of the subduction zone associated with the Japan Trench, which separates the Eurasian Plate from the subducting Pacific Plate. A part of the subduction zone, measuring approximately 190 miles wide, lurched as much as 164 feet to the southeast and thrust upward about 33 feet. The earthquake could be felt as far away as Russia, Taiwan, and even Beijing, China. It was preceded by several foreshocks, and there were hundreds of aftershocks following, dozens 6.0 magnitude or greater. This earthquake was the strongest to strike the region since the beginning of record keeping in the late 19th century, and it is considered one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. It was later reported that a satellite orbiting at the outer edge of Earth's atmosphere that day had detected infrasonics, or very low-frequency sound waves, coming from the quake. The sudden horizontal and vertical thrusting of the Pacific Plate displaced the water above and spawned a series of highly destructive tsunami waves. A wave measuring some 33 feet high inundated the coast and flooded parts of the city of Tsunami, including its airport and surrounding countryside. According to some reports, some waves penetrated some 6 miles inland after causing the Notori River to overflow. Damaging tsunami waves struck the coast, and as the floodwaters retreated back to the sea, they carried with them enormous quantities of debris, as well as thousands of victims caught in the deluge. Large stretches of land were left submerged under seawater, particularly in the lower-lying areas. The earthquake triggered tsunami warnings throughout the Pacific Basin. The tsunami raced outward from the epicenter at speeds that approached 500 miles per hour. It generated waves 11 to 12 feet high along the coasts of Kauai and Hawaii. Several hours later, 9-foot tsunami waves struck the coasts of California and Oregon. Finally, some 18 hours after the quake, Waves roughly 1 foot high reached the coast of Antarctica and caused a portion of the Sulzberger ice shelf to break off. Initial reports of casualties following the tsunami put the death toll in the hundreds, with hundreds more missing. The numbers in both categories increased dramatically in the following days as the extent of the devastation, especially in the coastal areas, became known and rescue operations got underway. Within 2 weeks of the disaster, the Japanese government's official counts of death had exceeded 10,000. More than 1.5 times that number were still listed as missing and presumed dead. By then, it was evident that the earthquake and tsunami constituted one of the deadliest disasters in Japanese history, rivaling the major earthquake and tsunami that had occurred off the coast of Iwate Prefecture in June 1896. As the search for the victims continued, the official count of those confirmed dead or still missing rose to about 28,500. However, as more people thought to be missing were found to be alive, that figure began to drop. By the end of 2011, it had been reduced to some 19,300 people. Coastal cities and towns, as well as vast areas of farmland in the tsunami's path, were inundated by swirling waters that swept enormous quantities of houses, boats, cars, trucks, and other debris along with them. It became clear how many thousands of people were missing, including, in some cases, half or more of an entire town's population. Of significant concern following the main shock and tsunami was the status of several nuclear power plants. The reactors at 3 nuclear power plants closest to the quake's epicenter were shut down automatically following the tremor, which also cut the main power to those plants' cooling systems. However, inundation by the tsunami waves damaged the backup generators at some of those plants, most notably at the Fukushima plant, number 1 plant. With power gone, cooling systems failed in 3 reactors within the first few days of the disaster. Melted material fell to the bottom of the containment vessels in reactors 1 and 2 and burned sizable holes through the floor of each vessel, which partially exposed the nuclear material in the cores. Explosions and fires from the reactors led to the release of significant levels of radiation from the facility in the days and weeks following the earthquake. Workers sought to cool and stabilize the damaged reactors by pumping seawater and boric acid into them. Because of concerns over possible radiation exposure, Japanese officials established an 18-mile no-fly zone around the facility, and an area of 12.5 miles around the plant was evacuated. The evacuation zone was later extended to the 18-mile no-fly zone, within which residents were asked to leave or remain indoors. At the end of March, seawater near the facility was discovered to have been contaminated with high levels of radioactive iodine-131. In mid-April, Japanese nuclear regulators elevated the security level of the nuclear emergency at Fukushima from a 5 to a 7, the highest level on the scale. This placed the Fukushima accident in the same category as the Chernobyl accident. In the first hours after the earthquake, Japanese Prime Minister moved to set up an emergency command center in Tokyo, and a large number of the rescue workers and some 100,000 members of the Japanese Self-Defense Force were rapidly mobilized to deal with the crisis. The rescue work itself was hampered initially by the difficulty in getting personnel and supplies to the devastation zone. Compounding the difficulty were periods of inclement weather that curtailed air operations. Workers in the disaster zone then faced widespread seas of destruction. Vast areas, even whole towns and cities, had been washed away or covered by great piles of mud and debris. Although some people were rescued from the rubble in the first several days following the main shock and tsunami, most of the relief work involved the recovery of bodies, including the hundreds that began washing ashore in several areas after having been swept out to sea. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, several 100,000 people were in shelters, often with limited or negligible supplies of food or water, and tens of thousands more remained stranded and isolated in the worst hit areas as rescuers worked hard to reach them. Within days, the number of displaced people in the Fukushima area grew as the situation with the nuclear reactors on the coast deteriorated, and people left the quarantined area. Gradually, many people were able to find other places to stay, or they just relocated to other parts of the country. Some 250,000 people were still in hundreds of shelters in the region 2 weeks after the quake, but in the ensuing months that number gradually decreased. Two years after the disaster, a small number of people still remained in the emergency centers. However, more than 300,000 displaced residents were living in prefabricated temporary housing units. In the weeks following the disaster, much of the northern Honshu's transportation and service infrastructure was at least partially restored, and repairs continued until train lines and major highways were again fully operational. However, the region's power supply continued to be affected by the ongoing situation at the Fukushima plant. This resulted in temporary power outages and rolling blackouts. To learn from the tragedy in Japan, researchers collected extensive data on tsunami wave forces and building performance. This facilitated improvement in tsunami mitigation strategies, such as building codes. And thanks to the establishment of the Pacific Tsunami Warning System in 1965, the loss of life outside of Japan was minimal. If only it could have helped save more lives in Japan itself.